Hello and welcome. There is greater geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainty at this moment than there has at any point in time in recent political history. And when there are so many unknowns up in the air, who better than the world's top foreign affairs guru Fareed Zakaria to try and give our viewers a sense of what to make of the Donald Trump presidency and the impact this has in India and the rest of the world. Fareed Zakaria, for taking out time and joining us here at the India Today studios. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure to see you, Rahul.
Absolute delight to have you. When there's so many things happening and people wondering what's going on, just as you wrap your head around the first thing that Donald Trump has done, there's another big announcement he's making, and then everybody's trying to chase and understand what that means. From what you were expecting from Donald Trump to what he's done in his first few days in office, what are your initial impressions of Trump 2.0?
I think the most important one is that the guardrails are off. When Trump won the first time in 2016, he didn't think he was going to win. And we know this for sure. I have this from very good authority. And so he stumbles into the presidency, and he takes with him two very important groups of people who act as guardrails. The old Republican establishment. Remember, his first chief of staff is a man named Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, whom he barely knew. And he brings in also 3-4 generals, because he admires generals, and he thinks they're going to help him execute his vision. And in both cases, what he found, I think I'm now going to speak from his point of view, is that they were not fundamentally loyal to him. I think they would say they were loyal to the country and the Constitution more than to him. But whatever it was, he realized these people were not going to execute his vision. Trump 2.0 has none of these people. There are no members of the Republican establishment. There are no generals, you notice. It's all people who have expressed absolute devotion and loyalty to Trump. So what that means is you are going to see the Trump agenda enacted, implemented, as much as possible. Now, there will be some hard realities that you confront. Domestically, the hard realities are America is still a constitutional democracy. So, for example, he said everyone has to get back to work 5 days a week. Now, I am basically in favor of that. I tend to think it's the right idea. But there is a federal employees union that has a contract in which they negotiated a certain work, a work from home provision. I'm sure they will take him to court. I'm sure there will be some. So there will be, there's what you're seeing now is a flurry of almost declarations of intent. That doesn't always translate. And then the second, of course, is in the international sphere. Trump loves to upend, and to get people on edge. I'm going to annex Canada and it will be the 51st state. Obviously, many of those things aren't actually going to happen. So what we have to say is, where's the end state? What is he trying to do here? And in many of those cases, again, if you go back to Trump 1, he didn't succeed. In some cases, he did. So right now what you're seeing is a flurry of activity and declarations, much of it designed almost like a psychological game with his allies and adversaries.
You're saying he'll be able to get done what he wants and what's on his agenda, but that also seems to keep changing. He, for example, took a very strong position on TikTok, wanted TikTok banned, and then hours before that actually happens, he gives them an extension. So his agenda also seems to be very fluid and nebulous.
So Donald Trump, for the most part, has very few fixed political views. Very unusual, I think, for a politician at his level. But what, and so you're absolutely right. There's an enormous amount of fluidity. He may change his mind about something. I think it's worth noticing something, though, which is really quite stunning. The loyalty that he has, that his base gives him, the trust he has. So he is the man who, as you say, in his first term, banned TikTok by an executive order, and his base cheered. He now comes and he unbans TikTok with an executive order, and his base cheers. Even that unban, by the way, might not actually happen. But, again, here there's a bit of a comparison with Modi. Modi has some of that. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone, certainly not in an advanced industrial democracy with, supposedly educated voters and things like that. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, this guy can reverse himself on almost anything. and his base would say, we support you.
The Argentinian president was here. If you join all the trends that we're seeing internationally, what's the image of the leader who's emerging, who manages to win votes at this time? There's several similarities and some dissimilarities between Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump, and since that equation will be so critical to what happens between India and the US, do you want to shed some light on similarities, dissimilarities, and this populist kind of leader who seems to be winning at the expense of the more liberal leader?
So I think the core similarity is anti-establishment, outsider, disruptor, and that sense that you're coming into power, kind of over the backs of a long established political establishment. So the Argentinian is like that. Erdogan was like that when he came in. Modi was like that. Trump is like that. Now the interesting question is, at what point, after how many years in power do you become the establishment, or can you keep running as the anti-establishment candidate? I mean, Prime Minister Modi has now been in power a long time, and yet he has managed to, in some ways, still present himself as the outsider. This is Donald Trump's second term in the presidency, but he still presents himself. Part of that, the skill of a populist outsider is to claim to be the outsider, and the right in America does it by saying all the cultural institutions are captured by the left, the universities, the media, and things like that. And again, there is that similarity with Modi. So I think there's a lot in common, and they're both very skilled politicians. I think Prime Minister Modi is a much more detailed policy wonk in a way that Donald Trump is not. Donald Trump is much more intuitive. He's much more, he can change his mind every day. I don't think those pieces of it are less true of Modi. Modi is somebody who looks at policy carefully, makes decisions in a fairly analytic way, follows them through. Now, he may make political choices, not to implement something or the other, but that part of Trump is, I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's very rare for somebody to come that high up in the Western political establishment, not that concerned about the details of policy.
President Trump is railing against Canada, continuing to call Canada America's 51st state. He's insisting he wants Greenland. He wants to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He wants the Panama Canal. What exactly is he aiming for? Because surely Canada can't become America's 51st state. What does he want?
So it's a very good question. I think, what Trump is going for is the idea that, look, what is his slogan? Make America great again. So he wants both the symbols and substance. So the symbols are, you rename, the Gulf of Mexico and you call it the Gulf of America. It's a cheap thing. Most countries won't follow along, but
can you do it? I mean, if it's the Gulf of Mexico, can you suddenly say it's now the Gulf of America?
I remember growing up in India, every time you would get maps from outside the country, the borders would be blacked out because the Indian government did not agree with the borders that were being drawn by Encyclopedia Britannica between India and Pakistan. So it's a little bit like that. America will call it the Gulf of America. I don't know that other countries will do it. Maybe a few American allies will do it. Maybe Saudi Arabia will do it. But it sends this rah-rah patriotic signal. With the others, I think there's a very interesting kind of worldview that Trump has, which is that America's allies, not adversaries, allies, have taken advantage of it. And that America has been, too willing to accommodate itself to its allies. If you talk to people around the world, that is not the impression people have of America. They have the impression of America, which is a very powerful country, gets its own way, writes its own rules, gets special exemptions for whatever it wants. And I think that's factually closer to the truth. But for Trump, he's obsessed with this idea that he needs to get a better deal for America on earth. So everything is part of a negotiating strategy. So the Canada thing is he wants to reopen trade negotiations with Canada. So throw them off guard, throw them off balance, try to, get them, to be guessing as to what's happening. With Panama, maybe he wants a better deal on the Panama Canal, what they charge the U.S. Navy. Maybe he wants to put a base there. Does he really mean that he's going to go in and use military force and invade Canada and conquer it? very much doubt that that's what he's thinking. I think he'll find the Canadians are proud nationalists like many countries. With Greenland, again, he probably wants significantly bigger basing rights and mineral rights and things like that. You could probably get these other ways. You know, there are many ways to negotiate. But Trump's way is always put the other guy on the defensive, do something that psychologically unnerves him and puts him on the back foot. The danger, to my mind, is America has built enormous goodwill with these countries, with its allies, in Europe, in Asia, over 8 decades. And that's why these countries have sided with America in all kinds of wars, geopolitical contests, against the Soviet Union, against Russia, against China, against Islamic terror. You know, that is built because you conduct international relations not as one-on-one transactions where you always win, the other guy loses, but as relationships. You're not just thinking about the transaction, you're thinking about the long-term relationship.
But is this the madman theory at work? Because all the research that I read about President Nixon, and when this was attempted in the past in the academic research around it, seems to suggest it doesn't work. So it's not as if, you know, he can pull this off and be successful at it. Does the madman theory in your mind work?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, Nixon tried it very, very often. He talked about explicitly, and the case he was talking about, just so people understand, was with Vietnam, with North Vietnam as it was called then, which is I'll bomb them a little bit, I'd make it out that I could even use nuclear weapons. They didn't buy it at all. You know, I mean, nations have a very shrewd understanding of what you're trying to do, what your interests are, how far you go. So I very much doubt, for example, he's, you know, threatened Russia with tariffs or if they don't come to the negotiating table. I don't know what he's talking about because we already have sanctions on Russia. No Russian goods enter the United States anyway. So what tariffs would, you know, so Putin is not stupid. He knows that that's an empty threat. So I suspect that this is just part of Trump's, you know, it's the way he is. I'll give you an example. In 2017, when he first meets the president of Panama, he's President Trump then, first thing he says to him is, you charge us too much for our Navy. Now, the Panama Canal Authority charges the U.S. Navy $1 million a year. The U.S. defense budget is $800 billion. So that is roughly 0.0001% of the Pentagon budget, or, you know, 0.00. It's the fourth decimal place. Why is he doing that? I mean, the President of the United States is trying to haggle, you know, and get a discount.
Why is he doing that?
Because it's his nature. I mean, you know, he's like a Bazari. He goes in, you know people like this, I know people like this, very rich people, they go into Chor Bazaar and they will not pay the retail price. And they'll say, no, that bag of spices, that garam masala, you're charging me 14 rupees, I'll pay you 9. Now, you know, for somebody worth what they are, is that, you know, and then they get to 12 rupees. You've saved 3 rupees on a bag of garam masala. It's that sense that I got a deal. I pushed you. You know, and again, the danger is, yeah, fine, you can do that, but, you know, what does that do to the relationship? What does that do to the trust?